I wanted to be a lawyer from the time I was quite young, certainly from the time I was a teenager, in part because my father had studied law in Vienna and was never able to practice because the Nazis wouldn't let him, and in part because of the stories I grew up with. I became convinced at a very young age that justice and the rule of law was all that you had to protect you, and that it was absolutely vital and fundamental to surviving and having a decent life. My father was a refugee, and he landed in this country on the day that war broke out, September the 3rd, 1939. My mother was born here, but her mother died in a concentration camp in Poland. And I think when other children were getting Peter Rabbit stories or whatever, I was getting stories about what life had been like in Poland when my father was young. And my mother weeping, still weeping bitter tears over the inability that she experienced in trying to rescue her mother from Poland. I hold, I think, a world record in that I attempted the Oxford and Cambridge Women's Colleges exams 9 times before I got admitted. But I was determined to get there because I'd read about Oxford when I was very young. Cambridge would have done, but I read about Oxford when I was very young, and I was determined to get there. My first proper job, and it was a lucky break, was with the Law Commission. It was just starting up, and I found this out. I found out that there were junior jobs, and I went round and I got a job. I was just really a footnote writer and a tea server, but I was able to mix with the greatest legal brains at the time, Lord Scarman, Jim Gower, and others, and the Lord Chancellor was wafting in and out. And it was so exciting. We thought we were going to reform the whole of English law, that Parliament would pass all the acts. And you really got the feeling that you could grip the law and take out of it that which was wrong, which had always been an interest of mine, and reform it. And that was exhilarating, gave me lots of good contacts. I found that people helped me because I was one of the very few women coming through. And by the late 60s, the barriers were dropping and people were thinking, let's have a token woman or two. So on the whole, people helped me. Also, I'm not the sort of person who notices discrimination. I tend to march on regardless. The only thing that I thought, and I believe I was wrong, when I was called to the bar, I thought, well, I can't go on with this. I can't get a pupillage because you need money and you need influence. Neither of which I had. I didn't really want to practice that much, so I sort of said, oh, can't do this. And I went off into teaching instead. Between 1970 and 1976, I had such amazingly brilliant girls, law students, because women were then coming forward in great numbers to read law. But Oxford certainly had 5 women's colleges and 35 men's colleges, or thereabouts. So the women who got admitted to Oxford were, frankly, a lot brighter than many of the men who were admitted. And when they were applying for articles, as it was called then, or pupillage, sometimes they'd come to me in tears, holding out a letter that would say, "Dear Miss So-and-so, we don't take women," or "Dear Miss So-and-so, we only take 1 woman a year." And I compiled a blacklist, and when the law changed in 1976, and they were no longer able to say that, I still said to my students, don't apply to the following firms. They didn't want you 3 years ago, they won't want you now, go somewhere else. But that was very upsetting. Some of those top firms missed out on top talent in the early 70s. The field I'm best known for is family law, which I started at the Law Commission. When I started at Oxford, it had just come on the syllabus. There was virtually no one to teach it. And I got a note from John Ekelar, the very distinguished family lawyer, saying, "Ruth, you must teach family law. There's no one else to do it. Here's a reading list to get you going." So I started teaching family law. And I was resistant at first because I thought, oh, women always do family law. But once I started, I absolutely loved it and carried on. I taught other things too, but that was and remains my first love. I am where I am because of the great good fortune that my college, St. Anne's, had a nursery for babies in the garden. And when my daughter was 6 weeks old, I bundled her up in her carefully sanitised nappies, and she went to the college nursery where they dropped her on the floor, which was none too hygienic, and she got on with it, and I got on with it. And childcare became a great obsession of my time at Oxford, and it's still a problem for women lawyers, because I've seen so many who are doing brilliantly, and then they get married and they have one baby and they manage, and then they have a second, and it all becomes just too much. Obviously, if they want to stay at home, that's fine, though sometimes it's a shame. But if there was help for childcare, if I had a magic wand, I would provide free childcare for everybody who wanted it from 0 to 5. I was sitting at my desk one Friday afternoon at St Anne's and the phone went. I remember it was late Friday and there was nobody around, and a voice said, "I am John Sharp from the Department of Health. Have you ever heard of the Human Fertilisation Embryology Authority?" And I said, "Well, yes, I have, because I teach, or I used to teach the law of children, and it came up." And he said, "Would you like to be chairman?" And a little light went off in my head, and I said, yes, I would. Because when I was young, the great adventure was not to have children. It was contraception and the pill. It had never crossed my mind, not seriously, about the millions of women who couldn't have children. That was a revelation to me. I should have been aware of it, and I wasn't. So that was a very enriching and humbling experience. 1 in 6 couples have infertility problems. Every dinner party I go to, every gathering, even now, someone will sidle up to me and say, "My daughter, my sister, we've got this and that problem." So that was a real revelation. Albeit I had no biology, none at all. I mugged up what was necessary. And I thought, well, if I can understand it, then I'm able to explain it to the public, which was what I had to do. One of the things I'm most proud of, when they open me up after I'm there, they'll find Dolly the sheep carved on my heart. Because Dolly the sheep, the first cloned mammal, was born in 1997, and the world was horrified at the prospect of cloning, quite rightly. But the scientists at the HFEA got the rest of us to understand that you didn't have to clone a mammal, but if you had a cloned embryo, you could do research on that, you could get stem cells, which one day, it's beginning already, one day will lead to new muscles and cells that are failing. I mean, for example, I've got arthritis, and the first thing I said to the doctor was, "Can't you inject some stem cells in my ankle?" And he said, "Not yet. But one day there will be these cures which you grow from your own cloned cells." So we fought to get that accepted and to make sure the public understood that we weren't cloning beings, we were cloning cells and doing research. And that has put Britain in the forefront, right around the world. We are ahead of the world in the liberalisation and success of our research. I was always a bit of a stubborn campaigner from my youth onwards. I was always fighting for this and fighting for that, and like talking. I remember being in a mock political campaign when I was at school, and I looked at the career of MP and I thought, oh, that's not for me, I couldn't possibly do that, it's too uncertain, it doesn't fit with family life. And then this amazing thing happened. In the year 2000, the law was changed and an independent House of Lords Appointments Commission was set up. The hereditary peers were mostly expelled, and the idea was that the commission would appoint a handful of peers every year to be independent, and they would be chosen for their expertise. And I'm a great one for filling in forms and volunteering and putting my hand up for this. And I saw this in the year 2000. I thought, well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. So I filled in a form and sent it off. And 5 years later, I got a letter saying, please come for interview, in a discreet little quiet house in Westminster with nothing on the front door. And I went in there, and there was a peer and a couple of other members of the commission. And they said, we know all about you. How much time have you got? What could you talk about? And I said, well, I can talk about higher education, women, divorce, the Middle East, HFEA, the BBC, because I was the governor of the BBC, a Rhodes trustee, right, they said. And then I got a phone call from Tony Blair's office saying, you know, the Queen is minded to appoint you. But I had to sit on it as a secret for a couple of months, which was very difficult. But that was a real thrill. I mean, I never thought, as the daughter of a penniless refugee, that I would end up in the House of Lords. I mean, even now, I find it quite hard to get my head around it. I've pursued a few things. I've campaigned for restitution from Poland. 3 million Jews lived in Poland before the Nazis came, and they were all killed, leaving behind factories and property and works of art, including the property of my grandfather and grandmother. And Poland is the only country in the European Union that has made no attempt at all to regularise the situation and pay compensation. I've campaigned for that. I've got MPs to sign up. I got William Hague on the side, but to no avail so far. I've chaired a committee on the rights of disabled people. We put out a report 2 years ago, and I'm still pushing on with that. And currently, and for some years, I've pursued a reform that first occurred to me, more than 40 years ago, which is that the law about how you split money on divorce should be less confrontational, more egalitarian, more fair, more predictable, and much, much cheaper. We need to come into step with Scotland, with most of the rest of Europe, and make this a predictable, fair law which treats women as partners, not as servants. I cannot think of a better career for myself, and I think countless other women, than law. First of all, because it tells you what your place in society is, what you have the right to ask for, and that you are equal, you've got the law behind you. And secondly, it opens up such a range of careers, whether it's political, teaching, practice, civil service, foreign service, writing, all sorts of things, lots of careers. It could be flexible, and it is, I don't like the word, but it's accurate, it is empowering.